Hare Bhaktivedanta Founder-Acharya Prabhupada ki Hare. Namaskritchandranam chiranarottamam Devim saraswatim vyasam tato janam virayat Srinvatam sakata Krishna punyashavra kirtanam Prijyantasto hibhadrani vidyunoke shuhitsatam Naste prayashu vajreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya Bhagavati etmasloke bhakti bhagavati naistiki. Before reciting the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead, Narayan, unto Narayana Rishi, the supreme human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of women, and unto Shri-Vyasa, the author. Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who is the Paramatma, super soul in everyone's heart, and benefactor of the truthful devotee, cleanses desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee who has developed the urge to hear his messages, which are in themselves virtuous when properly heard and chanted. By regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam and by rendering of service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, and loving service to the personality of Godhead who is praised with transcendental songs is established as an irrevocable fact. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 22, text number 31. Rasyatyandusmritis chittam Jnana Brahmsa Smritikshaya Tadrodham Kaviya Prabhu Atmapanavam Atmana Rasyatyandusmritis chittam Jnana Brahmsa Smritikshaya Tadrodham Kaviya Prabhu Atmapanavam Atmana Brasyatyandusmritis chittam Jnana Brahmsa Smritikshaya Tadrodham Kaviya Prabhu Atmapanavam Atmana
Prasyatyandusmritis-chittam Jnana Brahmsah Pratikshaya Tadrodham Kavayah Prahu Atma Bahnavam Atmanaha Prasyatyandusmritis-chittam Jnana Brahmsah Pratikshaya Tadrodham Kavayah Prahu Atma Bahnavam Atmanaha.
Others?
Prasyatyandusmritis-chittam Jnana Brahmsah Pratikshaya Tadrodham Kavayah Prahu becomes destroyed.
Anusmriti, constantly thinking. Chittam, consciousness. Jnana Brahmsa, bereft of real knowledge. Shrinti Kshaye, by destruction of remembrance. Tatvadham, choking that progress. Choking that process. Kavya, great learned scholars. Rahu, have opined. Atma, of the soul. Apanavam, destruction. Atma, of the soul. Translation. When one deviates from his original consciousness, he loses the capacity to remember his previous position or recognize his present one. When remembrance is lost, all knowledge acquired is based on a false foundation. When this occurs, learned scholars consider that the soul is lost. Report by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The living entity or the soul is ever existing and eternal. It cannot be lost, but learned scholars say that it is lost when actual knowledge is not working. That is the difference between animals and human beings. According to less intelligent philosophers, animals have no soul, but factually animals have souls. Due to animals' gross ignorance, however, it appears that they have lost their souls. Without the soul, the body cannot move. That is the difference between a living body and a dead body. When the soul is out of the body is called dead. The soul is said to be lost when there is no proper knowledge exhibited. Our original consciousness is Krishna consciousness because we are part and parcel of Krishna. When this consciousness is misguided and one is put into the material atmosphere, which pollutes the original consciousness, one thinks that he is a product of the material elements. Thus one loses his real remembrance of his position as part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Just as a man who sleeps forgets himself. In this way, when the activities of proper consciousness are checked, all the activities of the lost soul are performed on a false basis. At the present moment, human civilization is acting on a false platform of bodily identification. Therefore, it can be said that the people of the present age have lost their souls, and in this respect, they are no better than animals. So, here's a statement by Jesus. He says, language of his poetic is his, but he says, what profit is it for a man who gains the entire world but loses his eternal soul? So we see that also within Christianity, and of course one may take that the wrong way, that one can lose the soul, but he is indicating that for all intensive purposes, for practical purposes, the soul is lost. Just like we said, knowledge which is not put into practice is lost. So we have knowledge, we don't put it in practice, it's lost. But if we again remember that knowledge and put it into practice, then it's there. It's somewhere stored within the memory. Memories are fascinating. I'm always fascinated by the memory. When the things are stored, so many things are stored in memory. You don't know where they are. There's like a filing cabinet somewhere there, and sometimes you can just pluck this thing. It's just like, you know, for us we have to make these computers and you know, some of the different things, a lot of technology to keep a few things on memory. But our memory is so subtle, can keep millions of times more in its memory than the best of computers that they'll ever invent. And it just sort of sits there without taking up any room at all. It's very, very subtle. So, so somehow it disappears back in the filing cabinet there. It's there, but it appears to be lost. So the soul, when we speak of the soul as being lost, as sometimes it is referred to in different scriptures or by personalities like Jesus, we understand that actually, the soul is forgotten, and therefore it's as good as lost. Still, unfortunately, because of a lack of scientific understanding of the difference between spirit and matter, many religious people and who have misunderstood their own scriptures, as Prabhupada said, he said the followers always bungle everything. So the teaching is presented there very nicely in the Quran, the Bible, the different scriptures, and yet somehow the followers, because they can't understand it, then they add their own materialistic, foolish interpretations and bungle the whole thing. And then, we have this concept that, some people have souls and some don't. If they follow one particular sect, they may get a soul. Otherwise, they will be eternally damned not to have a soul. Animals don't have souls. So there's so many different foolish understandings there. But as sort of Prabhupada explains here in the purport, that says, without the soul, the body cannot move. So, very common sense that we don't see anywhere within existence where matter can actually move itself and consciously move itself. So, this table, every morning we see that someone picks up the table from this corner over here, brings it over here, because we all know that table can't move itself because it's not a living entity, it's just never going to happen. So it's very common sense, doesn't take a lot of intelligence, and we see we have little children here, and I'm sure that they all understand that there has to be a living being, and that living being can consciously move matter, control matter. We see that even tiny little ants, they're so small, but they can actually, move, huge amounts of dirt and termites, and create these termite hills and so many things. They're so small, but because they're a living being, they have that potency to move matter, and yet no matter how huge matter is, it cannot move itself. So, the potency of the living entity, the body cannot move without the presence of the soul or the living being, and we see that as soon as the living being, the soul, leaves the body at the time of death, then that body cannot move. Because the living force has left. So we see that in that dead body, actually all the elements, material elements, are still there. one moment there's a living being, next moment that living being is dead, and yet all the same material elements is there. So it is the living force which has left the body, which is what keeps the body moving. As soon as it's gone, that body, although all the same material elements are there in the same combination, it cannot move itself. So here, this understanding, this is an interesting section of this Bhagavatam. Here we've been hearing from Sanat Kumara, one of the four Kumaras. These four Kumaras have appeared before Preeti Maharaj, and Preeti Maharaj is of course a pure devotee of the Lord and an empowered devotee of the Lord, and Sanat Kumara is speaking on the process of pure devotional service so that Preeti Maharaj can be situated firmly in pure devotional service, which he already is, but he is receiving lessons, of course, in such a way that all the residents of the kingdom, all the residents of the world, all the residents of the universe who hear this pastime, that they will also come to the platform of pure devotional service, which means that they can, and so Sanat Kumara has been describing the wonderful attributes of devotional service, that by devotional service it burns to ashes our karma for many, many previous lifetimes, right down to the root, which is the material desires. It burns to ashes even the material desires, and it actually destroys, therefore, the cycle of birth and death in the material world. And by that devotional service, one can also understand the personality of Godhead and follow a path that leads one back to the spiritual world. So all these things have been nicely described by Sanat Kumara. And then, in one sense it's almost like we go backwards. Oh, we're going back to the beginning again now. We're talking about, how, someone who has no spiritual knowledge, they're forgetting to practice any spiritual activities, or they don't even know about any spiritual activities, and they're existing like a lost soul, meaning that practically they're existing like an animal with complete forgetfulness of their own spiritual nature, the relationship between the Supreme Lord and the process of devotional service. So it's almost like a backward step. So this is actually as Prabhupada pointed out, I think in the previous verse, that we now get an indirect process of how we can develop our staunch faith in Krishna and the process of devotional service. So we see that this is a common factor in the Bhagavatam. You see that the different verses sometimes will take you to very, very elevated spiritual platform of understanding, very, very blissful, and then they'll come in again and just remind one of the negative consequences of not taking up that process. That one should be mindful of at the same time. And Krishna also did this in the Bhagavad Gita. So, for instance, I can get Bhagavad Gita. we see that in the 5th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, verse number 10, that Krishna gives this very wonderful meditation on the benefits of spiritual life. Thank you. Brahmanyada kamadi sangham chakva karotiya adipitena sapatena padma patram sa. One who performs his duty without attachment, surrendering the results unto the Supreme God, is not affected by sinful action, as the lotus leaf is untouched by water. So, if you go back through many of these verses that Sanat Kumar has spoken on spiritual topics, there's one beautiful verse by Krishna sums up all of that. That's the beauty of the Bhagavad Gita. You can take so many verses and just so eloquently spoken by the Supreme Lord Himself that if we perform our Krishna consciousness, because this chapter is called Karma Yoga, Action, Krishna Consciousness. So when it talks about karma, it's talking about being active, doing some actual work. But it is describing that that action is not fruit of action, but here it's action, but in God consciousness, meaning that we perform all our activities with this understanding that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is the predominator, and we are the predominated. He is the Supreme Enjoyer. Why? Because He's the Supreme Proprietor. And He's the Supreme Controller. So that is His position. He is Vibhu, or unlimited, and our position is Anu, we're limited. So we perform our duty without attachment because everything belongs to God, so everything should be used in the service of the Supreme Lord. So therefore one performs one's duty without attachment. So the idea is that we're performing our service for the pleasure of the Supreme. Everything is His, our body is that, and therefore even though existing in this material world, one is not touched. So one doesn't have to wait until one goes back to the spiritual world. Even while in this world, one is actually untouched as the lotus leaf sits on the water. Okay. So you see the lotus leaf. The scientists, they try and analyse the lotus leaf because they understand how is it this just can't get wet. You can throw water at a lotus leaf, it can sit on water, it doesn't get wet. But you have to look at it. You get into the magnifying glass, you go down thousands and thousands and thousands of times, and you just look at the overlapping structure, how it is. It just doesn't allow water in. It's just a very wonderful design by Krishna. So devotional service is like that. That the modes of material nature just can't penetrate into a devotee who is fully surrendered, working in Krishna consciousness. So this is a very wonderful meditation. So then, as we go a little further, again, he takes a backward step. In verse 22, as we said, and that verse there is very much a summary of everything Sanat Kumar has said so far. Then he says, Yehi samsparsaja bhoga dukkuyona ivate adyantavanta kuntaya nate shuranate buddha. An intelligent person does not take part in the sources of misery which are due to contact with the material senses of Sanat Kunti. Such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise man does not delight in them. And therefore, he says in the next one, Saknoti haviyasadhum prakshirira mokshana karma karod bhavam vedam sayuktaha sasukinara. Before giving up this present body, if one is able to tolerate the urges of the material senses and check the force of desire and anger, he is a yogi and is happy in this world. So, in the last part of that purport, text number 23, Srila Prabhupada says, it is the duty of the transcendentalist to try strenuously to control desire and anger. So, we're hearing two things, that by the process of bhakti, anger, desire, and the material senses are all checked. And then we're also hearing that, although bhakti is doing all that, we also have to separately endeavour to strenuously try to control desire and anger. So, it appears like two different things that are being spoken. So, in other words, one may question, why is it that Sanat Kumara has given the process of devotional service, you take up the process of devotional service, it will control your mind, control your senses, destroy right down to the root, the material desires, and the frustration of material desires coming in. And then again, although he's giving that process, then we're getting this warning of this how we can become, if we become deviated, then we can actually literally fall away from the spiritual path and become, one time Srila Prabhupada said, actually, if a devotee doesn't chant 16 rounds and follow the 4 regular principles, practically he's on the level of an animal. So, very, very strong statement there. But it shows you how one can fall. But so very strong there. But so here, so this is a very interesting concept. So now there's a nice statement which I, again it's in the same chapter, 5th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, and it's in the purport to 5:29. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says this, that says a pure soul is the eternal servant of God. As long as he is in contact with Buddha, he has to execute work in terms of material necessities. Krishna consciousness, however, brings one into spiritual life even while one is within this jurisdiction of matter, for it is an arousing of spiritual existence by practice in the material world. The more one is advanced, the more he is freed from the clutches of matter. The Lord is not partial to anyone. Everything depends on one's practical performance of duties in Krishna consciousness, which in every respect helps one control the senses and conquer the influence of desire and anger. And one who stands fast in Krishna consciousness, controlling the above-mentioned passions, remains factually in the transcendental stage or Brahmavana. That's a real statement by Srila Prabhupada that we understand that yes, devotional service has this potency to make us literally liberated, even while we're liberated from the body, liberated from the reactions of the body, liberated from the material, knowledge of material nature, and understand the spiritual science and understand the personality of Godhead. Still, it's not automatic that we actually have to take that devotional service and do the practical devotional activities. as a way of strenuously checking the impurities within our heart. So, again, at the beginning of class we read that verse from Shrintam Sakata Krishna Gangeswar Kirtanam Trijanto Bhakani Viruti Shritam. That one who develops the urge to hear the messages, the Lord, who is the super soul in the heart, he cleanses this material desire from the heart. Okay? So by hearing the Bhagavatam daily, hearing from devotees, it actually cleanses material desire from the heart. So that means, our strenuous endeavour is that we must get to class. We must mould our life in such a way, so in other words, we may decide, I don't feel so well this morning, I'm just sleeping, a bit cold, got so many things to do. Actually, I could earn a little extra money if I sort of get to work early. So our conditioned nature, our material desires, being in this material body, we actually have to strenuously work and make sure, yes, let me hear Śrīmad Bhāgavatam daily. So of course, it's not always practical for everyone to be able to go to the temple. Some people live a long way from the temple. Sometimes, for a lot of persons, of course, and then there are work restrictions and so many, duties at home. One has to execute those duties. These days, of course, one can just, hear. I think many people, probably, hundreds and hundreds of people will be hearing this class. Some of us are driving, some of us are working, some of us are, getting the children ready for school. So they're making that endeavour. So that's their strenuous endeavour. So it's not automatic. And to the degree that we take up devotional service, that's also our strenuous endeavour. In the 6th canto, Srila Prabhupada says that the greatest obstacle on the path of devotional service is lusty desires. So when we have strong material desires, really powerful material desires, it creates very powerful obstacles. So that we may apply ourselves to a certain degree, but our endeavour should be we must strenuously try to apply ourselves to the devotional activities as far as we possibly can. Otherwise, we'll not be able to check the force of these material desires and material conditions. We'll not be able to do that. So we actually have to strenuously apply ourselves. So, give another example. So here, this, therefore, as Prabhupada says, the Lord is not partial to anyone. One should not think that this devotee is making so much advancement. I've been a devotee for so long, and why are they making so much advancement? The Lord's giving them so much mercy, and yet I just don't seem to be getting mercy. So, there's a verse in the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam which prays for the mercy of Sanat Kumara. It's in this 6th canto, 8th chapter, Narayana Kavacham. And it says, Sanat Kumara Vitha Karmadevada, that may Sanat Kumara protect me from lusty desires. So basically, we pray for the mercy of the spiritual master. The Guru prayers, we pray, and the Guru Vandana prayers. We pray to the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Namo Mahavana, pray to the Brahmachari, we pray to so many devotees and the spiritual master, please, and to personalities like Sanat Kumara, please protect me. So yes, they are prepared to protect one. So how if we pray to the mercy of Sanat Kumara, that you protect me from lust desires, what will happen? What will happen is the opportunity will come to get out of bed and go to class and hear the Bhagavatam of what Sanat Kumara is speaking about how to control lust desires. If one is laying in bed thinking, yesterday I prayed so much Sanat Kumara, I'm just laying here, I'm not getting up because no mercy is coming. I'm waiting for everything to be cleared out of the horizon. So, when we similarly, in that same Narayan Kavacha, there's, so if I read that whole verse there, Mam Ugra Dhamma, I'll read these two verses. Mam Ugra Dhamma Bhaktilat Madhan Narayana Putun Rascha Hasaptatas Ayogha Data Yoga Nataha Payat Kuneshaha Kavaha Kama Bandha. May Lord Narayan protect me from unnecessarily following false religious systems and falling from my duties due to madness. May the Lord in his appearances Nara protect me from unnecessary pride. May Dāsa, the master of all mystic power, protect me from falling while performing bhakti yoga. And may Lord Kapila, the master of all good qualities, protect me from the material bondage of fruitive activities. So of course, we pray for their mercy, and that mercy will come, that we can hear instructions of Narayana Rishi. In the 11th canto, we can hear the instructions of Dāsa. We can hear in the 3rd canto the instructions of Lord Kapila, and then hear Sanat Kumara Vatu Kamadevha Dayasira Mampati Devahina Devrisha Varya Gurusha Chanantarat Komo Hari Mam Ariyad Asishat. May Sanat Kumara protect me from lusty desires. As I begin some auspicious activity, may Lord Hayagriva protect me from being an offender by neglecting to offer my respectful obeisances to the Supreme Lord. May Devarishi Narada protect me from committing offences in worshipping the deity, and may Lord Korma, the tortoise, protect me from falling to the unlimited hellish planets. Now, in this purport here, Srila Prabhupada again shows how that mercy of personalities like Narada Muni comes. He says that lusty desires are very strong in everyone, and they are the greatest impediment to the discharge of devotional service. Oh, that's where that quote was. Therefore, those who are very much influenced by lusty desires are advised to take shelter of Sanat Kumara, the great Brahmachari devotee. Narada Muni, who is the guide for Archana, is the author of Narada Pantaratra, which prescribes the regulative principles for worshipping the deity. Everyone engaged in deity worship, whether at home or in the temple, should always seek the mercy of Devarishi Narada in order to avoid the 32 offences while worshipping the deity. These offences in deity worship are mentioned in the Nectar Devotion. So we pray to Narada Muni, I would like to worship the deity, and you please protect me from committing offences while I'm worshipping the deity. So then that mercy comes, that somehow or another, by our good fortune, we get the opportunity to hear from a devotee the Nectar Devotion, in which the summary of the Narada Pancharatra, the teachings of Narada Muni is there, listed very, very clearly what all the 32 offences are and how one can. And then one has to, as Prabhupada says, one's practical performance of duties. Everything depends. So the mercy is there. There's information. There's so many devotees practicing that. Here's the temple. Here are the deities. The mercy is there. Now, you strenuously try to avoid those 32 offences. So this so that very nice quote there from that Bird Boy 529. The Lord is not partial to anyone. Everything depends upon one's practical performance and duties in Krishna consciousness, which in every respect helps one control the senses and conquer the influence of desire and anger. And then it describes the one who stands fast in that. They come to this Brahma-nirvana, or this situation in which they are actually transcendental to material existence, even though they're situated in this material world. And of course, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna also confirms, again, another confirmation of this same factor, that in the 10th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Tesham saririyuktanam bhajatam pripurvakam tadami puriyogam tam yen mam lukuyate. To those who are constantly devoted and worship me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. And again, Krishna is saying the same thing. I'll help you from within, as mentioned in that verse, Śrīmad Bhāgavatam Krishna. I'll help you from within. I'll inspire you. I'll give you the intelligence. I'll send the gurus, the sadhus, the sastra, and they will give you so much intelligence. And I will also work within your heart that you'll understand that. But the qualification is that a devotee should be constantly engaged in worshiping the Lord with love. So, and to the degree that a devotee practically takes up the devotional service with great enthusiasm, chants 16 rounds with great enthusiasm, follows the 4 regular principles with great enthusiasm, strenuously tries to, be able to see when the urges of the material body are, raising their ugly heads within our heart, and to strenuously apply ourselves to devotional service, to quickly, smash those, those effects of Kali Yuga to pieces. Devotees who make that effort, to then, to the degree they're doing that, Krishna actually inspires them within the heart. Also, Prabhupada makes a very interesting point here also, that, then one may question, well, what about the new devotees who may not do that, like myself? So then he says, in this purport, a person may have a bona fide spiritual master and may be attached to a spiritual organisation, but still, if he is not intelligent enough to make progress, then Krishna from within gives him instruction so that he may ultimately come to him without difficulty. The qualification is that a person always engage himself in Krishna consciousness and with love and devotion render all kinds of services. He should perform some sort of work for Krishna, and that work should be with love. If the devotee is intelligent enough, he will make progress in the path of self-realization. If one is sincere and devoted to the activities of devotional service, the Lord gives him a chance to make progress and ultimately to attain him. And therefore, someone may have difficulty in the beginning, or for some reason or another, applying their intelligence properly to the Bhagavatam, the instructions of Krishna, and the Bhagavad Gita, and the instructions of the spiritual master, the instructions of the sadhu. But if they try to work for Krishna in devotional service, then Krishna will help them even from the very beginning. Will help them. So that this, and that is summed up again, just bear me for a second. That's very nicely summed up. You know, what is that working Krishna consciousness? It says, text number 25. It says, Labhate, from the 5th chapter, Labhate brahmanyevanam vrishakshana kamvasakshana dvaitha yatatmana sarvabhuta hitelata. One who is beyond duality and doubt, so they're hearing how Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Supreme Enjoyer, the Supreme Proprietor, the Supreme Controller. We are His eternal part and parcel of the Spirit Soul, so we're beyond duality and doubt, whose mind is engaged within. We're trying to act on the platform that we're a spirit soul, not the body. Always busy working for the welfare of all sentient beings, and who is free from all sin. So there's no time for illicit sex, gambling, intoxication, meat eating. We're always engaged in acts of Krishna consciousness, therefore completely free, and always trying to help others understand the position of Krishna and how we can surrender unto Him. That person achieves liberation and supreme. So again, same thing there. So in this way, Srila Prabhupada has, sometimes Srila Prabhupada, was criticised even from within ISKCON, even by some, some of his leading devotees. At some stage they thought, you're always getting us to do so much work and preaching, we want to sit down and, study these books of the Goswamis and hear a bit more about Radha Krishna and how to develop our love and so many things like that. And sometimes people would offer that criticism of ISKCON, you're just always working, everyone's just working like that. But actually it's a very, very important thing, that if our proper intelligence hasn't kicked in, and we're not fully acting on the spiritual platform as a surrendered soul to Krishna, and we have so many doubts, if we're working for Krishna, trying to help people to, get a copy of the Gita and take some prasad and chant Hare Krishna, then the Lord we become so dear to the Lord that He will work within our hearts, saying, the intelligence hasn't kicked in, I will give them that understanding. What hasn't come over millions and millions of lifetime, by just working hard for Krishna, it will come. And that process doesn't stop. That actually